Hey, welcome to the channel. My name is Jason, and here I talk about all things story. And the story I'm talking about today is the latest novel by Mr. Kazuo Ishiguro titled Klara and the Sun. If you don't know who this man is, well, he happened to win the Nobel Prize for Literature, and I've read two of his other books, The Remains of the Day and Never Let Me Go, both of which I loved. I love his sense of character and how he can tell such a deep story with so few words. His novels aren't very long, but man, what he captures within them is really amazing. So if you want to see a master at work, please check out one of his novels, if not this one, but let me get into what I thought about. So what is the hook? What is Klara and the Sun about? Well, it is about an AF, not what you think. It stands for artificial friend. So this is an artificial intelligence, very reminiscent of, if you ever remember the show from the 80s, Small Wonder. This novel somewhat brought back memories of that show for me, not to degrade it in any way. It is about an artificial intelligence, and these AIs are sold to people. So they exist in like a department store, and customers purchase them, usually for their children, because all of them are kids and they function as companions to these children. And one girl named Josie comes to the store multiple times, finally picking out Klara and taking her home. But we learn that not all is right in this home. We learn that Josie has a very serious illness. Her mother is not with the father anymore. And there's little hints of something more going on. And with all great stories, a tragedy lies at the center of this one, which is slowly revealed as you progress through the story. So what did I think? Well, let's talk about character first, my favorite. Now, an interesting choice of this novel. This novel is told in the first-person perspective by Klara, the artificial intelligence. And this is interesting because we get to experience this world and these characters through an almost clinical, almost objective way, even though there is some emotion lurking within Klara that manifests itself mostly later on in the story. But I think whenever you tell a story from an AI's perspective, you have the opportunity for irony, unintended humor, and all of that stuff is found here. Not that this is a funny novel by any means, but you can see with Ishiguro playing with the idea of the perception of an entity that has no emotion. And Josie, her companion, I think she's a great counterpoint to Klara because despite her serious illness, she's outgoing, she's upbeat, she's funny. And so while I think if her character would have been a little bit morose or upset all the time about how she was and the state of her health, I think it would have been a very different novel. So I really like that touch with Josie. And then there's the mother, who is overprotective as one would be. And she's actually the catalyst in a few scenes that are used as foreshadowing devices for later on, which it's funny in the beginning when you're reading these things, they do stand out as strange, but you don't quite gather the meaning. Whereas a lot of times with foreshadowing, you don't really notice anything until the end. However, here it's very apparent that something's not quite right. And it's a great device because it really captures your attention, and he beautifully illuminates it slowly as the novel progresses. He doesn't give anything away too soon. Nothing feels melodramatic or out of place, which is the mark of someone who has earned the Nobel Prize for Literature for sure. There's also a little boy named Rick who is in a different socioeconomic status, let's say, comparatively to Josie, and they have this fun little agreement. They're younger kids, but they've always decided they were going to get married and have this relationship together, but there's something that is kind of holding them back from that, and it has to do with the way society is run and expectations for children, and really just what they need to do to succeed in this world. Amazing character work here. I was completely enthralled, especially with the POV from Klara. It really allowed you to see things through the lens of objectivity, and it's something you don't really get to see because most novels are written from a human's point of view, and so everything is kind of through the filter of emotion and unreliability because that's how we operate. And those can be very powerful tools in your arsenal as a writer as well. And so I can imagine this was a very challenging novel to undertake and still have mystery and evoke emotion through these other characters on the sidelines. So let's get a little bit deeper into the plot. So it's a very simple plot. One that's interesting about structure here is that Klara actually doesn't go home with Josie for a while. I feel like it's about a quarter of the novel, maybe a little bit less, but normally you seem to think that the impetus, the catalyst, the inciting incident is going to happen much sooner in a book. So what this does, it allows us to get an idea of how these artificial friends operate. among themselves. It's as if they're a product in a store. So we get to observe that for quite some time. We get to see not only the interactions between Klara and the manager, the woman who runs the store, but also Klara and other AFs, and the new line called the B3s, which are supposed to be more sophisticated than the line that Klara finds herself in. So while it did feel like things took a little bit to kick into gear story-wise, I did appreciate that touch in hindsight, because whereas many lesser authors, I'm sure, would think like, we need to get out of that point and get into the human world as soon as we can. But it was a great opportunity for us to empathize with Klara, even though she is a machine. And I guess I should talk about the sun, because it's in the title. It's a very important part of the book. These artificial intelligences, they absorb the sun for energy. They look at it as a god. In fact, Klara refers to the sun as he, and the sun does play a major part later in the book, especially to Klara herself. And she attributes a lot of what happens in the novel to the sun and its power. But while Klara is at home with Josie and her mother and the housekeeper, we do get to see the dynamic there. We get to see the dynamics between other children, how all of education is done at home mostly. And I really love the way Klara describes things. She describes things as someone who doesn't know what they are. So these kids clearly have, like, cell phones or mobile devices or tablets of some kind, and she calls them oblongs. And even if she's describing something like a picture frame, she may describe it as a reflective rectangle with a wooden border. So there's a lot of instances here where normally you describe something as what it is because we have a word for it, but because it's through the eyes of this AI, she's describing things in a very visual manner, which was interesting. It kind of created this puzzle somewhat. Not that it was ever really that confusing. I found myself understanding exactly what she was describing every time, but it just really allowed us to get further into the head of her, which was great. So as I mentioned, Josie is sick, her mother is devastated, and there's a lot of overbearing parenting that happens throughout the novel, dealing with tragedy, and Klara just sits at the center of everything as kind of not only the person that we get to observe this through, but the thing that really emphasizes both the strengths and the weaknesses of the human characters. I know I'm kind of being all over the place, and I probably should have talked about this in the character section, but another thing I really like about Klara is how naive she is. So even though she's an advanced AI, she's a robot, she should be smarter than humans, be able to understand and convey complex ideas, there is an ignorance there. And the ignorance comes from not being human. And so I think that's a great statement to make, is that, no matter how advanced you can make something, there's something that's definitely missing within something that's been manufactured. And there's a great commentary about this in the novel itself, which is actually a realization from Klara herself. So this is a very cozy novel, not a cozy mystery, but it's one that you can just kind of sit there and savor. There's not a lot of turns or anything like that, and the major turn of the novel, or I guess when you figure out exactly what's going on, happens at about 60 or so percent, so somewhat after the midpoint. And then unfortunately, toward the end, in the third act or fourth act, depending on how you like to structure stories, there's some really odd character moments. And I think that's really the one downside to this whole thing, is that it was so strong in the beginning, the middle, even going toward the end. But there's this moment just kind of between, I'd say, like 60 and 85% that I just found myself double taking when I was reading and thinking it was going to pay off in some time, but it never really did. And there's some minor plot points at the end that just feel a little bit too rushed. But these are minor nitpicks, and I think this is a great novel from a character standpoint, from a storytelling standpoint. So I don't want these criticisms to sound like I didn't like it at all. I really enjoyed this novel quite a bit. I wouldn't say it's my favorite novel of his, but I would still say it's a great novel that I highly recommend you read. So let's talk about the writing itself, or what I like to call the cinematography of the story, the line-by-line work. As I mentioned, this is told in first person from the POV of an artificial intelligence, or the artificial friend in this case. And the challenge here as a writer is being reserved, right? We're observing the entire world through the eyes of someone who is highly analytical. So while there is some emotion that creeps through, especially toward the end, I really enjoy the fact that this was told in this perspective, because while I can imagine it was only a challenge for him to do without slipping into subjective territory, because, most novels are written from a very subjective POV. It really illuminated a lot of things about the character and just the concepts in the novel. And I think writing a book like this, putting things in the terms of what they are, without bias, without emotion, without ideologies or religions or anything like that, it really gets you to examine what is. And despite the fact that Klara has almost no emotion, you really feel for her, and the ending is this just beautifully sad conclusion. So with all that said, I'm gonna have to give Klara and the Sun an 8.5 out of 10. Amazing character work, a brave POV choice that succeeds brilliantly, an engaging plot despite the deliberate pace of it, and it has a great payoff as well. However, there's just that unfortunate bit in the third act that felt like it came out of nowhere, and then some of those rush plot points mar an otherwise amazing novel. So should you read it? Yes, I highly recommend you read this novel. Unless you're looking for something like Ex Machina, which is a great film, by the way, just a very different perspective of an AI, or The Terminator, or something where AIs just destroy the world, this is not it, okay? But if you want to see good storytelling from a master storyteller, one that shouldn't take you too long to get through, I can't recommend this novel to you more. Well, I hope you enjoyed this review, and if you'd like to see me create and not critique, check out my series Worth 1,000 Words, where I write a 1,000 word short story based on a piece of artwork without an outline every single week. And if you'd like to support the channel, give me a like if you like the video, subscribe if you like story-related content. Come hang out with me on my live streams. Check out my books. Everything's in the description below. And thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next one.